this is it. This is the end of and the culmination of all of the stuff that we have talked about up to this point. Asher is very excited that we've gotten here. He is giving kisses, which may turn into... Oh, there's the bites. He is now... I thought we were done with the teething phase. But he is still a good dog and a great producer. Right, Ash? Good boy. Okay, so culmination time. Optimizing the Pokemon damage formula. Let's talk about it. Here's what we've done so far. We found out that maxes and mins occur when the slope is equal to 0. That's when we had that flat line. If we can find the derivative, or we can find the derivative of a function using the power rule, we can use the derivatives that we find using the power rule to tell us about the slopes of the functions. Once we set the derivative equal to 0, we can find where those critical points, those maxes and mins, occur. If we have multiple variables in our function, we have to find partial derivatives so we can account for the different directions that the graphs can go in. When solving for specific values to a set of functions, we can use a system of equations to find those specific values, because we've got 4 variables and 4 equations. Here's the steps that we're going to take in this video. First, we're going to plug in the values that represent the competitive rules of Pokemon. Really, that's just one number. Then we're going to use that one number to reorganize the damage formula, use our order of operations, make that damage formula as easy to work with as possible. So when we're doing the derivatives and the partial derivatives, that it is as easy as possible. Then we're going to find the partial derivatives for each of the 4 variables: power, attack stat, defense stat, and the modifier. Next up, we set each equation equal to 0. Then we solve using our system of equations that we just talked about in the last episode. We will have some help for this last step because it is a little bit tricky when we have 4 variables and 4 equations. So step 1, we've got our damage formula and we need to plug our information in. We're going to use single letters instead of words to represent our variables. H is going to represent damage because I think of damage as health. P is going to represent power, A stays A, D stays D, and then M represents our modifier. The level for all competitive Pokemon is set to 50, so we're going to plug in 50 for the level, and this is what we're left with once we've translated it all. Let's start working on that reorganizing. Let's do order of operations first. 2 times 50 is 100. 100 divided by 5 is 20. 20 plus 2. Ash, come here, bud. Hey, come here, buddy. Come on, that's why all your toys are in here. Sorry, we have a dog on the loose. Come here, bud. Loves these rubber bones, though. Alright, so we've got 20 plus 2 is 22 times P times A over D, where we get 22 PA over D over 50 plus 2 times M. 22, there we go. PA over 50D, once we keep change flip, plus 2 times M. Then we can, one moment, here's where we left off, distribute the M to both sides, use our multiplying fraction rules to get that M up top in the fraction, and we can also isolate the coefficients together, and anything in the denominator of the fraction is being raised to a negative power, and since D is to the first power because there's no exponent, it's to the negative first power. So what we're left with is 22/50ths PAMD to the negative 1 plus 2M. as our damage formula. So let's talk about optimizing it. Let's slide back down here and finding these partial derivatives. So if we take the partial derivative with respect to our first variable p, I'm going to regroup everything. So all of my not p terms, my constants, are all grouped together, and p is by itself. The power rule says we bring the exponent down, the invisible 1, and bring it down as a coefficient. The p disappears. Oh, 2 plus 2m is a constant, so that disappears as well. And what we're left with is 22/50ths amd to the negative 1. Let's slide that on over and take a look at the partial derivative with respect to a. We regroup, so we use the commutative and the associative properties of multiplication. And now, this actually falls into the same boat as p, where it's to the first power, so we bring down the coefficient. Don't have to worry about it because it's just a 1, and then it disappears. 2m is just a constant in this case. So the derivative with respect to a is 22/50ths pmd to the negative 1. Slide it on over, and let's talk about m. This one we regroup. The first half is the same, the second half is a little bit different. First half, we brought down the 1 and the m disappeared. But 2 plus 2m, we brought down the 1, now the 2 is still left over. So anything to the first power just remains with whatever constant was there originally. So that is the partial derivative with respect to m. 22/50ths pad to the negative 1 plus 2. Slide that on over. And this is the tricky one, where we have d. So we know that the plus 2m is going to cancel away. There's no d, so it's just going to be times 0, so that cancels away and disappears. The first half, though, we have to bring the negative 1 down in front and then subtract the original exponent by 1 to get the new power. So we bring the negative 1 down, and the new power is negative 2. Please pretend this upside down e was a d. The subscripts did not have the letter d. Don't know why. We can rewrite this because negative 1 times 22/50ths is just negative 22/50ths pamd to the negative 2. Now we have all 4 equations, so we have to set each partial derivative equal to 0. So we have 0 is equal to first, second, third, and fourth equation. Now we need to solve it. So we have to isolate each of the variables, plug them into the next one, and then keep doing that until we can get one variable solved for. Well, here's the deal. Plot twist. It's nearly impossible to do this by hand. When I first started this project, I spent about a month working on this, and it was so challenging. It was very fun. I enjoyed every moment of it, but it was very, very impossible to do this by hand because there's just too many moving pieces. Luckily, computers and calculators do exist in the real world, so we are able to use those tools to help us. So the website that I used was Wolfram Alpha's System of Equations Solver, where I typed in my 4 equations, like so, clicked on that compute button, and the result I got was the following. M equals 0, A doesn't equal 0, P is equal to negative 50D over 11A, and D does not equal 0. Those are not really specific values. They're kind of moving pieces, which kind of makes sense. There's a lot of moving pieces in Pokemon. You never face the same team. Hardly anybody, I should say, sets up their Pokemon the exact same way as somebody else. So it makes sense that they're not static values. They're not exact numbers. But we can still take these results and think about them and see what they mean. So let's discuss them. The ideal circumstance is always to achieve m equals 0 as a critical point. We did get one static value, and that static value was m is equal to 0. The truth is that that's really hard to achieve. But it raises the importance of always trying to limit your modifier as much as possible. And remember, that modifier includes type, resistances, and super effective hits. So resistances and weaknesses. And it takes into account single target versus multi-target moves. So if you can limit those as much as possible, that has the most impact, which I know, we all know. Well, duh, not very effective attacks do less damage. But that is the most important. One of the players that I think does this really, really well is Wolf Glick. Wolf Glick always is so good at pivoting and making the reads and pivoting into Pokemon to receive not very effective hits. And I think this is part of the reason why that's a very effective strategy. A can't equal 0, D can't equal 0 is up next. Makes sense. The stats of your Pokemon cannot equal 0. That never happens in the game. But that has to do with more of the fraction rules than anything else. So we don't really need to worry about that. This is the most crucial part, though. P is equal to negative 50D over 11A. What this says to me, in my mathematical perspectives, is that having a higher defensive stat is more advantageous according to the critical value of P, as the coefficient, the number attached to D, is greater than the coefficient attached to A. So, why I think this is important and where you can see this is really at the end of when a game is coming to its competitive close. So right now, we are currently in the closing era of Sword and Shield. And what we have realized, and it usually starts off this way and goes through this trend, is that when a game is released, it is very, very popular in the meta to go with your very, very aggressive aggro teams where like the Excadrill, Durant, and the other one was Dratixel were very, very, very strong and popular in the meta because those Pokemon could just hit hard. But as time goes on in the meta, usually it starts to become into the defensive cores that start to really thrive. So Amoonguss has made a resurgence over the last couple years of Sword and Shield. Lunala wasn't one of the top. Asher's just eating it. Oh, there it is. He's got a bone. So Lunala is somebody that's coming back big time right now as one of the restricted Pokemon that's in Series 12. And that's more of a defensive Pokemon. Granted, the Meteor Beam and Power Herb combo is letting it become offensive, but it wasn't initially looked at because it was so much more defensive compared to its counterpart in Solgaleo. So I think that's where that trend comes from, because in the long run, you get more bang for your buck when you invest in defense over attack. Of course, you still have to invest in attack because you got to get knockouts to win a game. But that 50 carries more weight than the 11. So that's really interesting stuff, in my opinion, and why I wanted to make this series. So that's all I've got. Thanks for tuning in. I've got one last episode to close this out, where you can extend these ideas and concepts into other video games. So if you find that interesting, tune into the post-series episode to really see what you can do for other games. And thanks for tuning in.